Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Kelly Palmer.
Good morning, I'm Kayla David.
Welcome, everyone, to Be Well Live. We are happy to have you with us this morning. Welcome to our first-time viewers. Kayla and I are part of the healing department at Family Service of Rhode Island. And Be Well Live is one of our favorite things to do. We come together to discuss various topics related to how to cope with COVID-19, but also talking about general wellness topics. For those of you who aren't familiar with Family Service of Rhode Island, we are a social service and behavioral health organization here in Rhode Island, and we've been operating for over 125 years. We offer a variety of services, including telehealth counseling.
We will be joining together today and every other Wednesday for Be Well Live. For the past year, we've been focusing on topics related to how to cope with COVID-19. And as we continue to move forward, we'll do that along with incorporating general wellness topics because we know that while the pandemic is not over, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. With that in mind, we want to encourage as many people to tune in as we can. So please take a moment to share this with your friends or to start a watch party. Help us reach as many people with this important information about overall wellness and being well during the COVID-19 pandemic. We know that more than ever, it's important for us to be able to reach out, connect with one another. That's the same as it was at the beginning of the pandemic, right? We need that community support and we need to be supporting those in our community. So if you're struggling or you know someone who is struggling, try to connect and reach out for assistance. After over a year, still can't believe it, of living through the COVID-19 pandemic, the idea of venturing out to see our friends and family again, returning back to something that we used to enjoy, or being safe together as a community feels really sweet, right? Where we can kind of see it. We're beginning to see that in our community. However, for many people, the uncertainty surrounding the coronavirus and the social isolation throughout and even now is the hardest thing for most people to handle.
For sure, Kayla. And I think more and more people are having access to the vaccine. So that's really encouraging. And some may feel like the threat of COVID is over, right? Others, however, may be challenged with kind of continued or increased feelings of anxiety and mental health stressors. I know that just within my own friends and family group, there really is a wide continuum of how people are approaching merging back into the world. Wherever you are in the process of reentry, it's important to remember that there are guidelines that are still in place that are put there and put out as a way to help keep us safe and our community members safe as well.
Yeah. And Sarah, as you were saying, like there is this continuum for people.
Oh, yes.
As each and every one of us look around our natural, circles, right? Our social circles, there are a variety of responses. And the coronavirus hasn't made it easy, right? There's variants, there's all sorts of things that have gone into this process, and there's a lot of information out there. But what can be most important is remembering that we each get to make that decision of how we re-enter. Mm-hmm. And it may be different for each and every one of us, which can create a lot of things one to talk about, but it can create a lot of worry. It can create feelings of overwhelm. So it's normal to be worried about taking the next step or concerned how that might impact your health or your family's health. And for some, they might be, as you were saying, like ready to get back out there, and they might present with less worry, right? The worry's over, let's kind of get back to our normal lives. Well, for others, we might not be just ready yet to go out to restaurants and dine indoors or go to stores just yet. So there are a huge range of responses to reentry. And the difficult thing, I think, with reentry is that a lot of it is how we respond together, right? Between households or between our families. I mean, I've had this experience a lot of being like, I never want to know this much about my friends' lives, right? That idea of like, okay, well, if we're going to get together outdoors, how many people have you seen in the last 2 weeks, right? Or like, what's that date you're going on right before you're supposed to come and hang out with me? Those types of things. Like I think that's part of the difficulty is how much we have to be interacting and communicating about things. And that can lead to feelings of judgment. It can lead to feelings of overwhelm. It can lead to lots of feelings of anxiety as we're trying to navigate this pandemic and multiple responses together and safely.
For sure, Kayla. And I think that, things like social media can also add to these feelings of anxiety and wondering, like, if you're going to get together with a family or a friend and you see like, wait a second, where are they? How many people are there? There's just so many factors. And I think that that's why we wanted to talk about this topic today, because as we all begin to start to kind of re-enter the world, we thought it might be helpful to touch on a few important considerations to help us navigate kind of our own feelings about it, but also how we can communicate and interact with our friends and families because of that continuum of how people feel about reentry. So it's really important, and we have to be thoughtful about reentry while also really taking this opportunity to try to re-engage with the world, right? We know that this past year has been very difficult in so many domains, but I think mostly, it's impacted everybody's ability to connect and socialize with each other, which as human beings is such an important thing, right? To feed us to be a healthy human being. We are social beings, right? It's important for us and our children's development to be able to have connection and be able to socialize with others. So the CDC and the Department of Health in whatever state that you are in, is really the best resources that can help us to kind of provide guidelines for safe reentry, right? Because I think we all kind of have our personal guidelines, which is a good thing, but going to those really factual scientific sources can help to inform our own personal guidelines. And those are going to be different for those who have been able to access and get fully vaccinated, and those that have not yet had access to the vaccine, or maybe for whatever reason still haven't gotten the vaccine, those guidelines are actually going to look a little different. And for many households, what we're seeing is you might have some adults in the household who are vaccinated, but some that aren't, which can be really, really tricky. I know that's been true in my household for quite some time. So all of this can make it feel at times overwhelming to even begin to think about how you approach going back into the world. I was lucky to be able to access the vaccine before my husband, which felt really strange. And I was able to see a couple friends and family members before he was, which felt even stranger. So it's, I think, becoming really complicated for people as we start to reemerge, Kayla.
Yeah.
And can be stressful.
It's really stressful. And especially in those scenarios where we have, in couple relationships, right? In family relationships, we need to be having those conversations. What feels comfortable for one family might be different than for another. So everyone has to move at their own pace. And it can be really hard to take that first step. It can be really anxiety provoking to be thinking about taking that first step. It's okay not to be ready, but I also think we want to be careful of like how much the anxiety is taking control, right? As we're reentering, as we know that we're getting access to the vaccine, what we know about the transmission on surfaces and all of those other things, it's important for us to have that information because it's important for us to be able to, and this is a difficult thing to do, right, Sarah, to say, okay, is this my anxiety speaking or is this factual? Right. Because we have been socially isolated for a very long time, which can can build a lot more anxiety. So that idea of going out or seeing people, even if it's outdoors with masks on, in a safe way, if that's kind of presenting with a lot of anxiety for you, I mean, this is a very normal thing. And yet that might mean I need a little bit more help, or I need to talk to someone about this. Just this was, and we've been talking about this since the beginning. This is not just a physical health pandemic.
Right.
It's really a mental health pandemic, and the mental health effects of the pandemic are likely to go on much longer. So just kind of doing that check-in with yourself can be really helpful. It's okay maybe not to be ready to do all of the things yet.
Right.
But we might want to consider what it looks like to go on a socially distant walk or get creative about meeting those social needs. And if it is feeling really anxiety provoking, really stress provoking, and you maybe aren't taking those steps and you haven't for a long time, then this might be the time to say, can I talk to someone about this?
Right.
And I think it's important to practice ways to manage stress as a family. And one of those is not to shy away from talking about our feelings. Right? I'm feeling anxious about this. I'm feeling really stressed. I haven't left the house. I'm feeling depressed, whatever that is. And I think the most important thing we can do is start conversations in our household. Know that we do not need to make all the decisions today. And I think, in my household, we've been really deliberate to say the decisions we're making when we were making them in December are going to be very different than the decisions we made in February, very different than the decisions we make today in April. So the decisions that you're making, I think it's also important to say, to put kind of a caveat to it, that they go with the science, right? So if the data shows that there's, like in December, when there were so many cases, your response might have been really different than it is now. But I think lots of fights can happen, lots of hurt feelings can happen, lots of feelings of overwhelm. If we're not being deliberate about those conversations, while also saying we are collaborating on this, we want to make sure that people feel comfortable. So that idea of not assuming that everyone in the household feels safe and comfortable, we need to be able to talk about that. While also saying, okay, but we can come back to this in 2 weeks, or we can come back to this in a month. And the guidelines are not set in stone.
Yeah. That's so important, Kayla. And I think especially including children in that conversation in an age-appropriate way can be really powerful, because especially for younger children, it can be difficult for them to understand those changes. But if you talk to them about it, right, and keep that open dialogue, it'll be much easier for them to understand why it's now okay to, to visit a neighbor or a friend, or, eat inside at a restaurant. So I just want to encourage people, don't leave kids out of those conversations, because it's so important that they also understand on their level that these fluctuations and changes are okay, and that we're being thoughtful about them. So my family, Kayla, as you know, has been personally impacted by COVID, and it has very much informed how we've approached in my immediate family re-entry into the world. And it's also caused some stress and, difficult conversations within our family, because we actually had a loved one who died from COVID. And as you can imagine, the grief has been overwhelming. But, what's really complicated that grief, I think, is this varying level of continuum of how people are relating to the world within, my family group or close friend group. So we have the whole continuum of family members who have been extremely cautious as a result, and maybe, the loss of our loved one really informed that cautiousness. Family members who are taking extra precautions above and beyond the CDC guidelines, and then family members who have re-entered the world and are eating inside restaurants and being much more socially active and connected, because I think for their grief, they need that connection, right? And there's really no right or wrong way, but I know in my family, there's been times where it has caused difficult conversations and hurt feelings, and strong feelings, right? That are often really hard to talk about. And I'm sharing this just because I think, not talking about it is really what makes things so much more complicated, and you know, being honest and open and having those conversations that might be uncomfortable can really, in the long run, help to lead to better understanding if you're having a disagreement about, you know, where you're going or who you're going to be seeing. So I know that we've had to make hard decisions about not going places or seeing people because that was the right decision for our family at that time. But as you're saying, Kayla, that evolves, right? So, just being open and talking and sharing your feelings can really help to open up that conversation between families if people are kind of in different places of that continuum. I think it's also really important to remember that you have a choice in what you want to do and where you want to go. Most people have a choice, right? I do know some people that don't necessarily have a choice in their employment and having to show up. So, right, we're not talking about that. We're talking more about how you relate and socialize in the world. And if you have friends or family who are approaching reentry in a different way, that's okay, right? You don't have to do exactly what your friend is doing or what your family is doing. A good way to help make those thoughtful and informed decisions is to kind of look into what are places like restaurants or gyms doing to help keep guests safe, right? So I know it can be really helpful to call and ask over the phone, what are you doing, to keep people socially distanced? How are you approaching having a crowded waiting room, or those specific questions that you might be wondering? A good tip, Kayla, you gave me was to look on Yelp or Google reviews about what people are saying about how establishments are following COVID guidelines, right? That can be a really powerful tool to help kind of ease our anxiety and to inform us about how places are approaching this. And even after kind of looking into these things, you still might decide that you want to limit the number of family members who are maybe going into eating into a crowded restaurant or a grocery store. But the important thing to remember is you have control over that and you can make that decision and you can have those conversations as a family. I think we have to keep those conversations going as things really ebb and flow.
And I think it's important to know your boundaries and express what you need, whether that's in a relationship with a friend or in your family. It's okay to say, I don't feel comfortable doing that, right? Maybe you are, like you were saying, Sarah. I mean, I have friends that I've seen, what they're doing on Instagram or Facebook, and I'm happy for them. And in the same way, I'm not sure that would make me so safe if I was to interact with them. So it's okay to say, I'm not there yet, or I'm not ready, but I think they are really difficult conversations. I think what can come out of that in this odd way that I think lots of families and adults are kind of figuring out is I've had friends that have said, like, I've never had a real adult conversation with my siblings until we had to navigate what each of our kind of households was doing related to COVID. So this is also, in this weird way, an opportunity to have, actual conversations that go beyond the surface level of the weather or what you did this weekend or things like that, which can be helpful because what happens is we learn from those conversations, right? Having hard conversations about COVID also helps us have hard conversations about other things when we need to have those hard conversations. But it can be a very difficult thing to navigate. And then it becomes a little bit more complicated for those who are or not fully vaccinated, right? So you might be ready to re-enter, but we have to consider when we're interacting with others, not only our own safety, but our family safety and then our community safety. And it's important to recognize that, especially for us that might be younger, right? Our elders in our community have been much more socially isolated than us because of their health, and for other people of different ages with health, previous, health issues. So being mindful that the way that we show up really does impact other people in our community. And we have to kind of keep that we mentality. But as we're kind of coming to being, maybe for those who are fully vaccinated, it might feel like we're invincible, but there's still steps we aren't, and there's still steps we have to take to keep ourselves and our fellow community members safe. So, I did a quick search, Sarah, of the CDC's recommended guidelines yesterday, because they are, just like we were talking about before, household guidelines might change over time related to the science and the data. The CDC's guidelines have changed over time related to the science and the data. So they're saying for fully vaccinated people, so if you yourself are fully vaccinated, and fully vaccinated means that you've gotten, both doses and it's 2 weeks past your second dose. For those that might have taken the Johnson & Johnson, 2 weeks past that initial dose, that one dose, that means you're fully vaccinated. So you still got to wait, even if you got it the other day. But we can take they still ask that we take precautions in public, like wearing well-fitted masks and physically distancing. So we're not kind of walking into places without masks on. We're being asked to kind of still wear masks, and physical distancing is still being asked of us. So again, we want to adhere to prevention measures when we're visiting unvaccinated folks, especially if they're at increased risk for COVID-19. So if they have health symptoms of their own, then we might be vaccinated, but they're not. We might still need to physically distance, adhere to kind of other prevention measures like wearing masks. However, if we're fully vaccinated, we're visiting other fully vaccinated people, the CDC says that we can go indoors or outdoors without wearing masks or physical distancing. So that's kind of a new thing that we can take on, and they're kind of talking about, and Rhode Island talks about certain households, right? Kind of pick a household, and that's a conversation to have with a family. What household are we going to pick to hang out with? Because we still aren't kind of opening all of that up. But we still want to, when we're out in public, we still want to wear masks. We still want to practice some of those prevention measures, because again, not everyone in the community is vaccinated. Not everyone in the community is choosing to be vaccinated. So we want to be kind of cautious of that. And just as we were talking with Dr. Chan, right, all of this is working up to what we call herd immunity, or that ability to have, more people that kind of we can begin to kind of slow the curve or flatten the curve. They're still saying to avoid medium and large size in-person gatherings. So we're not doing large kind of events just yet. And if you have symptoms of COVID-19, still get tested. There's lots of sites. There's sites even that you don't even have to sign up for an appointment. You can just walk in to get tested. So if you are experiencing COVID-19 symptoms, they're saying to get tested. Still, even if you've become vaccinated, or even if you've gotten the vaccine.
And I think, Kayla, because of the vaccines, we are seeing this light at the end of the tunnel. But as we kind of have this reentry, it's really important that we do check in with ourselves and be mindful that although we might be excited and, we're vaccinated and we can do, we can visit with other vaccinated people without masks. That's like a really exciting thing, right? To see somebody's face after so long. We may still face some unforeseen hurdles, right? Or kind of some anxiety might sneak up on us about this. Just because, we may be out of danger, and we know this from the trauma work that we do, Kayla, it doesn't necessarily mean that our brain kind of knows that, right? We might have, as a result of the pandemic, developed kind of this learned fear, right? So where our brain might react to certain situations as if they were life-threatening. So if you have been home for the last year, right, because of the pandemic, and let's say you're working from home and you've been getting groceries delivered and you really have limited your social interaction, to kind of flip that switch now and to go and interact, your brain might still be reacting as if that were a dangerous situation. So this can really lead to things like feeling more anxious, feeling more irritable, and really kind of overall stress. So you might be experiencing that yourself, but I think it's also to realize that if you aren't, others around you might be, right? And those are real and normal reactions to what has been a very abnormal time in our society here. So, If those feelings do come up for you as you're doing reentry here, if you're experiencing anxiety or other mental health symptoms, it is okay to reach out for help. And we talk about this every time we're on, right? Whether it's to a friend or a family member, or even to reach out for professional help, because in our lifetime, we've never had a pandemic where people have been had to have these precautions for over a year. So it's very normal to have some trouble as we start to kind of re-enter and things open up. So we just want to encourage people to reach out if you are struggling with that, or if you see a friend or family member who might be struggling, right? Open up that dialogue with them, because it really can make all the difference. And I think it's also to remember that everyone's experience of this pandemic, while it's been this collective trauma and this collective experience, our individual experiences can be unique, right? So it's important that we support our friends and our families' decisions about how they want to approach reentry, just as we hope that they will respect our decisions about how we're doing it, right? So you mentioned this earlier, Kayla, trying to stay away from judgment, right? And having open dialogue and conversation instead. And know that you can practice social connection in a variety of ways. And the important thing is to do what feels right and comfortable to you, and to keep checking in with yourself and your family. Because as you mentioned, Kayla, that's going to evolve and follow the science.
Mm-hmm.
It's so important.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Sarah. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. We look forward to seeing you in 2 Wednesdays. And actually, we already know our topic for our next show. So we will be having a special guest join us to kick off Foster Care Awareness Month. So please, please, please come join us in 2 Wednesdays at 10 a.m. for a discussion on foster care awareness.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Be well and be safe.